Museums date from an era when people like me and many of the people listening to this film were excluded from all forms of, social, economic, political, cultural power. And it's been a struggle over many centuries for those who were excluded from those institutions to find representation. But so the origins of that exclusion lie in the 18th and 19th century, when much of the institutional infrastructure of this country and the Western world evolved, and museums, prisons, hospitals, schools have much in common. Tate specifically opened at the end of the 19th century in 1897, and like many museums, it was the kind of product of a private individual who had aspirations to present their collection to the public. So Henry Tate, private collection, wanted to share it with the public and create a national museum. And there was very strongly at that time a feeling that the public would benefit from access to art, and that's very widely felt again in the Western world. Right at the beginning of a museum like Tate, a significant divorce between the content of the museum and the people who make that content, the artists, and then those who consume the content, and that's the people. 100 and so years on from that, we still have this framework which is about the content, the museum, and the audience. But of course, Henry Tate's ambition to create a collection of great works of art that he described as representative of what? And of course, he was talking about the production of a very narrow pool of talent. And maybe I should speak specific about women because today's International Women's Day, but from the Renaissance onwards, really from the beginnings of the kind of growth of the academies, women were unable to gain the tools to arm themselves to make those kind of paintings. So there could be no great women artists. When I first came to the Tate in the 80s, that was beginning to change. And of course it was beginning to change under huge pressure from artists, from practitioners outside the institution who felt very much excluded. And they range from, or covered others, people othered by gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, disability. There's so much vested interest underpinning the canon with an institution like Tate. You think that although it's a public institution, it's built from private collections. Tate's great holdings came often through gift from powerful, influential people. It's a canon that's represented in the marketplace. Disentangling that canon takes a long time. And I think for Tate, the breakthrough moment in terms of thinking about the canon, rethinking history and beginning to open it up came when we had the opportunity to move some of the collection into this new building, which was Tate Modern. And we really felt that at the end of one century, beginning of another, it just wasn't possible to tell this single narrative of art history that was so white and that was so male. And it was so evidently exclusive and so inadequate to explain the kind of amazing global creativity that we were witnessing at the end of the 20th century from artists of many diverse backgrounds in many parts of the world. We deconstructed the narrative that we could tell in our displays by moving away from chronology. And it was a simple thing. It seemed very radical at the time, but what it did do is it just created a completely different framework for thinking about fine art and broader culture. The journey for us at the Tate since that time, and I think for many cultural institutions, is how do you then broaden that narrative for a broader public? And we have done that really by building a collection that reflects the diversity of art now. It reflects, I think, really importantly, the very multicultural city in which we live and work. This is a national museum. The collection is in public ownership, and I think we all feel there's a duty that we need to reflect the people who own the museums. I think the resistance, which is very, very deep-rooted, has been in trying to look at the work in the collection and see it differently. So not always to put this particular group of works at the centre, not to see the collection as built around a kind of group of icons that relate to a particular kind of history. So we all love the Rothko Room, we all love Rodin's Kiss, we all love The Little Dancer, but I think it's really important that all of us understand that those works became our favourites because of the way they were framed by the institution and the way we saw them through, through gendered eyes or through, eyes that we all have a bias. And but actually excellence, there's a fantastic quote from Eva Hess when she said that excellence has no sex, but excellence also has no colour, and it has no class, and actually it has no particular ability or disability, and it's unpicking the value system and the morality that comes with that value system that I'm really interested in. We all know that art is good for us, but actually works of art in themselves are not necessarily good. And it's conflating value with moral value and then with economic value. And unpicking all that, I think, it really is kind of mind-blowing. There are, in a way, centuries of inhibition to work through, centuries of discrimination. Just to give you a simple example, the language that has grown up around art is like a language that grows up around many disciplines is self-serving. The art world is an echo chamber. The way I talk about art, the way people who teach art talk about art is exclusive, and it's incomprehensible to many of the public. So when I say this is for everybody, we need to make sure that the language we use is for everybody, that everybody can have physical and intellectual access to everything we do, and that will take some time. Museums have been institutions within walls for many years, and one of the things that we all have to start doing is finding ways of metaphorically, if not physically, bringing down the walls, which is kind of ironic thing to say since we've just built this great new building. But bricks and mortar, that's a yesterday story. So we have to find a way of seeping into our communities and allowing communities to perchance by chance but feel comfortable about wandering in. I mean, the difficult thing to convey to people is that by everybody, I mean everybody. And we need to do a lot of work at Tate to make that message very clear and make it a really warm message. Do we want to continue with an institution that actually was invented in the 18th century and still occupies the framework is still there? Or do we want to adapt and become a different sort of institution, more like a park? The project we have at the moment in the Turbine Hall by Philip Perino he talks about that project as if it were a park, that you can walk through it and ignore it or just enjoy the atmosphere, or you can sit down and picnic, or you can contemplate something for a long time, you can have a debate there and an argument there, you can do your exercise. It's a place that gives people agency. I think it's incredibly important that all of us see ourselves reflected in culture. It's about being part of society, and I think you look across the world and everywhere we see huge sectors of populations who feel disenfranchised, who do not see themselves reflected in their societies, in their cultures, and that's not a healthy thing. We need to work towards being an inclusive, caring, civilized society where conversations can take place, where people can meet and have differences. And we need to achieve spaces where people can have the safe places where people can change their minds. And I do think works of art have an incredible alchemy. They have a potential to help people change their minds because they're very porous, they're very open. In a way, they're sort of disembodied, and art can create a space where you can reflect and potentially reconfigure your ideas. And that's what's happening at Tate Exchange, which has been a real, in some ways, inspirational, because we kind of threw it out there, who'd like to come and talk to us about making a collaborative space at Tate Modern. And lots of people came, and there's been just mounting interest in becoming part of this network, which has now created this extraordinary networks within networks, from huge national organisations to tiny local organisations. There's always somebody to say hello. They might be very young, they might be very old. There are absolutely no rules about how you participate. You can watch, you can ignore, you can hang out. And it's really interesting how it's beginning to create this very warm, very safe place that people who are quite different can find, be comfortable with each other. And that could begin to be the paradigm for the whole institution. Feels like a very tiny organisation, small grassroots experience at the heart of this international museum. And wouldn't it be great if the transition between the grassroots and the international institution felt kind of seamless and porous? I think that would be fantastic.